All right, Trevor. So let's get into talking about Louisville and why is Louisville a team that you have to be prepared to play good football against? Because I do think this is a good Louisville football team. You know, before the season, we talked about the ACC, and I said, look, NC State's the team getting a lot of love. They were a preseason top 25 team, and I said, nah, I don't think they're going to be that good. To the team that I think is getting underrated in the ACC is Louisville. And I loved a lot of the pickups they had this offseason. I thought Tyler Shuck, I like, if he is healthy, is a better quarterback than Jack Plummer. You know, they went out and got Colin Lacey, was a really good receiver last year. And he hasn't even played yet. He may play this weekend. He hasn't even played yet. You got Ja'Cory Brooks from Alabama. Ryan's talking about, and earlier in the post, a defensive lineman they got from Rutgers, who's been a really good player. But then there's also a lot of guys coming back that were really good players for them last year we'll dive into. And, of course, the big thing about it is I think they have one of the best coaches in college football leading the program, Trevor. And if you've been listening to me for a while, you know that Jeff Brom is on my favorite coaches list and what he does. And obviously we saw him him and his staff coach circles around Notre Dame last year, both from a preparation and then inside the game. Like now, Al Golden did a great job answering that first touchdown drive, but I've never seen an Al Golden defense on its heels as much as it was schematically that first drive against Louisville last year. It was a masterpiece. Now, because he's a big-time coordinator, Al Golden responded, and they came up with some things, and Louisville only had 7 points at halftime. But that first drive was a masterclass. And so you've got a talented football team, and you have a football team that's got, you know, good trench play, skill, a quarterback that can make plays with his arm, and a really smart group of football coaches. It's a legitimate football team. They have earned their ranking so far this year. How good will they be when the season's over with? I don't know the answer to that. Are they an 11-1 team? Are they a 9-3 team? We'll find. Saturday will kind of play a role in that, Trevor. But this is a quality opponent that Notre Dame fans and the Notre Dame team need to take seriously. If you get a win this weekend, Trevor, you beat a really good football. Is this Georgia? Is this Bama? Is this us? No, but neither was A&M. To me, this is a better team than even the one you beat in the opener on the road. Now that you're playing them at home, but as a team, this is going to be a tougher opponent for me than what that team was. Because this team's also good in the trenches like A&M was. There's a lot more skill talent on the roster at Louisville than there was at Texas A&M, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's a very veteran team. Through the pickups that they made in the transfer portal and who decided to return, I think it's on defense alone, 10 of the 11 starters on defense are juniors or seniors. And through their pickups that they made in the offseason, it kind of made up for what they lost. They lost 2 running backs last year in the to the NFL draft. And obviously Jack Plummer is no longer with them, but they were able to go out and make really good portal additions. And Brian, I think you hit the nail on the head, and they are a very athletic football team. And I think that a lot of people get caught up in like just the name Louisville, and they're just, you know, they always hover around like the mid-teens. This is a good football team, man. This is a team. I mean, I guess I don't have to explain it to a lot of people who are Notre Dame fans, but this is a team that could beat you. You know, this is a really good football team, and they're very well coached. And I think that's what makes them so dangerous. Is a well-coached and athletically talented football team is scary. So I think they're going to do a lot of different things on Saturday to get their playmakers the ball, especially on the offensive side. Going to be interesting to see if Colin Lacey does play, but even if he doesn't, Ja'Cory Brooks has been having his way so far this year. And then another guy that kind of came in out of nowhere in the Georgia Tech game was Chris Bell. Yeah. He had a few good plays after the catch.
That crosser that sparked them. That crosser for the touchdown sparked them because they went in a couple plays, but like Georgia Tech had a lot of momentum at that point in time, in my opinion. And that really sparked them a lot.
Yep.
It did.
And to your point, the quarterback that they picked up, am I pronouncing his last name right? Tyler
Shuck.
Tyler Shuck. Okay.
It's pronounced like Shuck.
Okay.
I don't know how they got that out of Shough. Okay. But yeah, I mean, when he first came out, I was like, Tyler Shaw, you know what I mean? Like, you know, SH, you know, you're thinking though, that, you know, and I'm like, nope, it's Shuck. I'm like, okay, whatever.
Well,
partner.
Well, regardless, Tyler Shuck, Tyler quarterback for Louisville. Yep, Tyler
Yeah.
Shuck.
Just say the Louisville quarterback. It works for me.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Whenever I don't know how to pronounce a guy's name, I say, yeah, that number 90 is a beast, man. That 90 is a handful. Or like Nico from Tennessee. It's Nico. Quarterback from Tennessee. What's his name? Nico. Well, what's his full name? It's Nico. It's all I need to know. It's Nico. You know what I'm talking about. I'm with you, man.
I think it just like in the old NCAA games, it's QB9. That's how I'm going to start wording it. But yeah, Tyler Shuck, he's going into his 6th year of college football, and he does have a lot of experience. He takes care of the football. He's a really good quarterback. He was a former top 300 recruit. It's kind of crazy to say back in 2018, but he's been around a lot, and he has shown that he can put the ball where he needs to. So far this year, I mean, yes, Louisville, their first 2 opponents, they didn't play anybody crazy, but I went back and I watched the Louisville-Georgia Tech game. Made a lot of really good decisions. He's a smart quarterback. He's not going to force anything, and now he has a lot of athletes surrounding him.
Yeah. I mean, Trevor, you talk about how they didn't play anybody any good the first 2 games. Well, his highest yards per attempt average and highest quarterback rating so far was against Georgia Tech, not Austin Peay, not Jack. I mean, he threw for more yards against Jacksonville State. That's because he threw 14 more attempts. He was 9.7 per attempt against Austin Peay, 10.6 against Jacksonville State, and then 14.2 against Georgia Tech. Hit several. I mean, and that's the thing is they came out of the gate throwing deep. I think it was he missed a ball to Ja'Cory Brooks got broken up, and then I think it was Brooks that caught the next one. They took another deep shot, and I thought it was Brooks that caught it. And then of course you had the big crossing route. So it is it's another one of those really weird situations too, Trevor, because actually I believe Tyler Shuck is a 7th-year senior.
Yeah.
But he's had a lot of injuries. He's had 2, like he got a medical last year because he got hurt in the 4th game. Then obviously you have the COVID year. You got a medical for playing in 2021. But this is a kid that if you go back and look at some of the production he's had, I mean, he was a starting quarterback at Oregon in 2020 that, I mean, you look at during the COVID year, his first 4 games, he threw for 227, 312, 334, 285. This is a kid that's put up some numbers in his career. Obviously started at Oregon, went to Texas Tech, threw for 399 yards a week before getting hurt against Texas. And when he got hurt against Texas, he was 9 of 11 for 68 yards and got hurt and was out for the year. The game before that, he threw for 399 yards. He comes up back the next year, gets hurt in the opener, doesn't play again for a while, comes back late in the year, throws for 436 yards in a win over Oklahoma, and then throws for 242 yards and a touchdown and runs for 111 yards in a bowl win over Ole Miss. This is in 2022. And then last year he throws for 338 against Oregon, or Wyoming, throws for 282 against Oregon, did throw 3 picks. But if you go back and watch that game, he was the reason they almost beat Oregon last year. And then of course gets hurt again. And now he comes out this year and he's playing the way he is. So this is a kid with a lot of talent. He just hasn't been able to stay healthy. But now he's healthy and very experienced, Trevor. Very experienced. We talked last week about we talked about Brett Gabbert and the production he's had. Well, this is a kid that has some production as well in his career, as we talked about. This is a kid that in his career has over 5,000 career passing yards, has 44 career passing touchdowns, has also rushed for over 700 yards in his career, and adds 10 more touchdowns. So this is a kid what is that? It's over 6,000 career yards of offense. So this is a kid that's played a lot of football, and Notre Dame's going to have to be prepared to your point. Look, if Jeff Brom has a quarterback, his team is scary. I don't care what they have everywhere else. If Jeff Brom has a quarterback, his team can score on you. I mean, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
His team can score on you.
100%. I mean, he's a guy that if you give him the time, he can sit back there and pick you apart. I mean, Georgia Tech learned that. And now they have the athletes at wide receiver to boot who are good after the catch. So, I know we're going to dive into this throughout the week, but, Notre Dame's secondary hasn't really been tested yet. And, the pass rush is starting to come alive. So hopefully all of those things start gelling at the right moments for Notre Dame's defense. But that's and
we'll dive more into that stuff tomorrow and Thursday for sure. because there are some very important matchups. Trevor, you're going to write about it at irishbreakdown.com, and then we'll also talk about it in some upcoming shows. But, just a little bit more about this Louisville football team. As Trevor mentioned, they are 3-0 so far this season. If you look at their first two games were not even remotely competitive. They beat Austin P in the opener. I think Austin P is 1-3 to start the season, I believe. They beat them 62-0. They beat Jacksonville State 49-14 in a game that I did not feel was that close. Now, Jacksonville State is struggling. They're 1-3 so far this season. They got blown out by Coastal Carolina, also lost a road game at Eastern Michigan. Actually, Vince's son was at that game on a visit. That game between, I think it was the Jacksonville State game that he was at. And then obviously this past weekend they beat Georgia Tech. This was their first true test, and I think they answered that test pretty well in this past weekend's game. So you want to talk about what their team looks like? Let's bring up some numbers so you guys can get a sense of where they are. Now, again, these are through 3 games against an FCS opponent and then obviously a not very good Power 5 opponent. And you look at their production so far right there, Trevor. I mean, 47.3 points per game for, 11 points against. They're averaging 502 yards of offense, only giving up 268.7. Now, that is the one stat to me that is most skewed towards the schedule. And I'm curious your thoughts on this, Trevor. When I look at the Louisville offense, and they're moving the ball pretty well on everybody. They only had 326 yards against Georgia Tech, but part of that was because they did have 2 non-offensive touchdowns. They averaged 7.1 yards per play. So their total yardage is a little bit skewed by the fact that they didn't have as many opportunities, but their yards, they were still 7.1 yards per play, which is their quote unquote worst output of the season. That was against a Power 5 team. Defensively, they held Austin Peay to 106 yards. They gave up 290 to Jacksonville State. Georgia Tech went for 410 against them and 5.9 per play. So I thought that was the defensive statistics, especially points, is the one thing that's a little bit skewed from the numbers. But rushing wise, you see it. They're a pretty good rushing team, 190 yards per game. They're very good at stopping the run. They rank 9th in yards per rush, 11th in yards allowed per rush. They rank 18th in passing offense, 5th in yards per attempt, 19th in yards per completion, 8th in rating. Have only given up 2 sacks all season. And they are a okay, solid third down team, but a really good third down defense so far this season. And then, of course, they have yet to turn the ball over, which is a good sign for them. So statistically, obviously, Trevor, this is a pretty good-looking football team. And even if you say, okay, yeah, 2 of those opponents weren't very good, their offense still looked pretty flipping good, even against a Georgia Tech team it's a pretty quality team so far this year.
I agree. I think the stat that sticks out the most to me is yards per rush, sitting at 2.5. I know one thing that kind of skews that a little bit is I'm pretty sure Austin Peay rushed the ball 34 times and got 34 rushing yards. So I think that is one that can be a little bit skewed in there, but that's still to the point. I think Georgia Tech still only averaged like 2.9 yards a carry, 2.7 yards.
2.7. So, yeah.
Yeah. So they are still a very, very good rush defense, and the most successful runner that Georgia Tech had and the most successful runner that Jacksonville State had was their quarterback, which is going to be an interesting matchup to talk about throughout the rest of the week. But Louisville's offense is very, very high powered, and they are able to move the ball up and down the field. So yeah, I mean, this is a very well coached football team that has a lot of skill behind it. 0 turnovers, I think, is a huge factor in that as well. So Notre Dame's going to have their hands full.
Yes, and I actually don't think Louisville's playing as well as they're capable of on defense, and their defense has still been pretty good. Their pass defense has been a problem for them so far this year, and we'll dive more into that tomorrow. But their run defense has been pretty stout. To your point, Trevor, is like Georgia Tech's a team that runs the football pretty good. I mean, they were come out in the game and coming into the game they had rushed for 190 against Florida State, 225 against Georgia State, 190 against VMI. Syracuse did a good job of shutting them down, held them to 112, but they were at 4.7 per carry in that game. They just didn't run it that much because they were behind. They were held to 98 yards against Louisville. They ran it 37 times.
Mm-hmm.
And so 2.7. And then you can look at it. Louisville had no sacks against Georgia Tech. So that was basically just them kind of shutting them down. Now, one thing and we'll dive into this even more tomorrow, but one thing that is interesting, and Jeff Brom talked about this in his press conference, is one aspect about their season so far is the one area that they've struggled to stop the run is the quarterback. Mm-hmm. So Jamal Haynes, the running back from Georgia Tech that we all are familiar with, he had 25 yards on 12 carries. 17 of those yards came on one attempt. And then their next running back, Traylon Maddox, had 14 yards on 8 carries. Zach Pyron had 1 yard on 2 carries. Malik Rutherford had 1 for 1. So their top 2 running backs had 39 rushing yards on 20 carries. Their quarterback had 58 yards on 14 carries and had a nice big run early for a touchdown. 23-yard touchdown. He had another 20-plus yard run. And then Jacksonville State's quarterback, who's a dual threat guy, rushed for over 100 yards against Louisville. So they have had success. They have had success stopping running backs running the football. They have not had as much success stopping mobile quarterbacks from running the football. Now, I know that they shut down Riley Leonard last year, but that was a hobbled playing on one foot version of Riley Leonard last season. It was not. It was the post Notre Dame injury, first game back, couldn't run version of that. Mm-hmm. And so we'll see if that can continue. But they didn't get beat like this quite like this last year. So we're almost see how they adjust to playing mobile quarterbacks, because they do have a lot of new faces on their defense, and I wonder if that maybe is factoring into it as well.
Sure. I think a couple things that's going to be fun just about this matchup in general between Notre Dame and Louisville is the stats almost mirror each other in the most opposite way possible. And I think that's crazy. Like, for example, Louisville's averaging 47.3 points per game. Notre Dame's allowing 9.8. And I think those matchups are going to be a lot of fun, right? Louisville's defense is only allowing 2.5 yards per rush. In the last 2 games, Notre Dame rushed for 8.4 yards per carry, and then I think 7.5 or 7.4 against Miami of Ohio. So It's almost like some of the strengths that pop out, the eye-popping strengths of these stat sheets, it's almost completely opposite for the opposing team. Which is a lot of good on good.
It's a lot of good on good. I mean, we talk about how good Georgia Tech's Louisville's rush defense is. Well, Notre Dame's been a pretty darn good rushing team. I mean, if you think about it, Trevor, and you think about Notre Dame's performances on the ground, you could make a very strong case that their running game from a blocking standpoint has been better against the Power 5 teams that they've played this year than it was against the non-Power 5 teams. Because like right now, here's a weird stat to your point. Right now, Notre Dame ranks 18th in college football in rushing at 238.3 yards per game. They rank 5th in college football in yards per attempt at 6.7. Here's a crazy stat for you. If you go to fcfbstats.com, you can actually go and mark by conference, by ranked, by unranked. If you look at Notre Dame if you look at all games versus Power 5 opponents, Notre Dame is 3rd in college football at 280 yards per game in 2 games. And they've averaged 7.2 yards per carry, which is 3rd. So Notre Dame has actually been much better against their Power 5 opponents than they were against their 2 MAC opponents. Now, they did run for a bunch this year, but a lot of that was Riley Leonard running because they were trying to slow it down. And what's ironic is Georgia Tech and Texas A&M is number 1 in rush defense against Power 5 opponents, but they only played 1 game against a Power 5 opponent, and Notre Dame doesn't count because they're not considered a Power 5. So they ran for 310 yards against Florida. And the next closest team that's played, so A&M's ahead of them, UCF is ahead of them, and then right after them is Mississippi, Purdue, and Oregon. And those are the teams after them. But all of those teams, all 5 of those teams that I just mentioned have played 1 game against a Power 5 opponent. Notre Dame has played 2. The next closest team to them in that's played 2 is Oregon State, who's all the way down at 230. Iowa, who's all the way down at 238 per game. And so that's a very, very interesting statistic to look at. So and it goes to your point of there's a lot of good on good in this game. A lot of good on good in this game. And, Notre Dame, ironically, Notre Dame has not padded their stats against the worst teams on their schedule so far. They've padded their stats against the better teams that they've played because they haven't scored a whole lot against the two teams that they've gone against, which still just kind of pisses me off. It's like I got to laugh or I'm going to cry.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
You and me both, brother.
And the reason Notre Dame's not considered Power 5 is because they're not in one of the Power 5. And I'm not saying this flippantly, but they're not in one of the Power 5 conferences. They're considered an independent. Mm-hmm. And so teams don't like they're a Power 5 for all intents and purposes, but they're not a Group of 5 either because like they can't get the Group of 5 automatic bid. They have it's about conference affiliation. And so no, UMass and UConn also are not Power 5 teams because they're not in Power 5 conferences. So and now it's Power 4, but this statistic says so. It's if you're not in the ACC, if you're not in the Big 10, if you're not in the Big 12 or the SEC, you're not a Power 5 team. And so Notre Dame, for statistical purposes, is not considered a Power 5 team. Which I only say that because it's funny that A&M's there because they didn't run the ball poorly against Notre Dame, but like Purdue is a top 10 team in rushing offense against Power 5 teams because they ran for 263 against Oregon State. If Notre Dame was factored into that number goes way down because they only rushed for 38 yards against Notre Dame, which is, again, what's so frustrating about last week's performance because Purdue ran for 248 and 8 yards a carry against Indiana State. They went on the road against Oregon State, rushed for 263 and 8.8 yards per carry. But against Notre Dame, they ran for 38 yards and 1.5 yards per carry. And Notre Dame's going to need to bring that performance because this Louisville team can run the football. They have 3 running backs that are averaging over 10 yards a carry. Now, that's one of those ones that's aided by who they played because those running backs averaged 2.3, 2.0, and 2.3 and 2.0 against Georgia Tech. But they didn't carry the ball a lot, and they were like 12 to 13, 14 yards per carry against the 2 previous opponents. But there's a lot of good on good in this instance, Trevor. A lot of good on good. Like and there's some areas that we'll break down more tomorrow where it's like, they're pretty good in this area. Notre Dame hasn't been. Third down defense is pretty good. Notre Dame hasn't been great on third down. They've gotten better the last 2 games. So it's a very interesting statistical matchup that we'll do our stacking up feature tomorrow. I'm going to try to convince Trevor to come on with me tomorrow. We'll see. Maybe pressure him live on air to see if I can get him to commit to it. But, we'll dive more into that breakdown of the Notre Dame rush offense against the Louisville rush defense and that type of thing as we break that down, which is going to be very fascinating. And we will look at the 2024 stats for that. But this is a good football team. And again, this is not a team that came out of nowhere, Trevor. This is a team that won 10 games last year and played for the ACC championship.
Yep.
Like this is a good football team. It's a really good football team. There's no doubt about it.
A lot of talent. So they know how to push the ball down the field, man.
That's right. So, Trevor, let's dive into Louisville a little bit and talk about why we think this Louisville football team is a good football team and what we think makes them an effective football team. And we'll start with offense. And really, we'll get into the talent here in a second. But when you really start with why I really like this Louisville football team, I will be honest. I have a bias when it comes to their head football coach. I do. I'm not afraid to admit that. I think Jeff Brom is one of the smartest football coaches in the business. And I've thought that when I first started watching his offenses at Louisville. I mean, at Western Kentucky, excuse me. And so that's always going to they're always a team to me that I'm going to be concerned about because Jeff Brom's there. And when they hired him, I kind of felt the same thing. Like, you're going to give Jeff Brom the kind of athlete is able to get? Like, seriously? This is going to be scary for the rest of college football. But it really does start there. Jeff Brom has proven to be, you could say some things about, okay, is he a great head coach? His defenses weren't great at Purdue and his O-lines, and I get all that. His defense has been pretty darn good the first 2 years at Louisville. And that's a more fair conversation to have. What I'm referring to more so is, and I do think he's a heck of a head coach. I'm saying you can have an open conversation about how good of a head coach he is when you look at his record and some different things like that. But what can't be debated is whether or not he's one of the best offensive minds in the game. Some in the chat, Andrew Gilmore's been on fire today with great quotes. He said Jeff Brom is like a moral Bobby Petrino. And I would agree with that. He's Bobby Petrino with a conscience. But I actually think Jeff Brom's an even better coach than Bobby Petrino because I don't think Jeff Brom until now has ever had the kind of athletes that Bobby Petrino had for a long time at Auburn and Arkansas and places like that. This is the first time he's actually had the kind of athletes. He had a guy here, a guy there. You know, he had Rondale Moore at Purdue and David Bell at Purdue, but he's never had this kind of talent he's had at quarterback, running back, wide receiver all together that he has now. And you see what he's doing with it. But just offensive mind, as we dive into the offense, Trevor, this is one of the best offensive minds in the business. And that's what Al Golden's going to be matched up against. And his brother is his offensive coordinator, who's also a pretty smart ascending football coach.
Jeff Brom has always historically done a really good job of utilizing the tools that he does have on offense, which I think is a really good trait of a coach. You know, there's kind of that two-track mind of you either, you know, recruit guys and you mold them into what you need, or you kind of do the opposite and you kind of mold your scheme to the guys that you currently have on your roster. And I think Jeff Brom does a really good job of doing both, which I think makes him such a dangerous offensive mind in college football, which I love. So, yeah, I mean, Louisville, they do a lot of really good things really well. They use a lot of different personnel groupings, man. It's awesome. All right, let's do it. I'm in for tomorrow.
Yes.
Let's do it.
All right.
Come on. Let's do it.
The thing, Trevor, you make a great point about that, because like I had a friend of mine, we were having some debates about, you know, he had asked me, you know, apparently him and some friends were having a discussion of like, let's just say for whatever reason, Marcus Freeman decided not to take the head coaching job. Would I have been happy if Jeff Brom was head coach? And I was like, yeah, I'd be ecstatic about that. And he's like, but don't you believe in being able to run the football? I said, yeah, I do believe in being able to run. He goes, well, he didn't run the ball at Purdue. I said, because he didn't have the ability to run the football at Purdue. He inherited terrible lines, and they didn't have very talented backs. And so, like, to your point, now his scheme is his scheme, pass game wise. But to your point, though, he tailors it to fit what he does. And I tried to make this point to my buddy. I was like, but go look at what he did at Western Kentucky. They had very balanced offenses at Western Kentucky when he was there. And now they weren't like light the world on fire running for 300 yards a game, but Jeff Brom had plenty of seasons at Western Kentucky where they were pretty good at running the football. And, you know, last year at Western Kentucky, he had a running back that rushed for 1,600 yards and 27 touchdowns, went for 186.4 yards per game. Right? Because why? Because that's what he had the talent to do. Now, they still threw the ball a ton. They had Mike White at quarterback. They threw for over 4,000 yards, but they were a dynamic team that also believed in running the football. You go to Purdue, don't have great running backs. You know, you don't have, your offensive line is a hot mess. And so you say, okay, we got to throw the football around a lot more. And that's what we're talking about, tailoring to your talent. It's not like, okay, let's run an air raid now because of it's we're going to fit what we do around and tailor it to what we have. And I'm not going to force feed, we've got to run the football just because it makes me feel better and it sounds like a great thing if we don't have the ability to run the football. But now you see him at Louisville. He's got better players. And guess what? He can run the football. Because do you know how many passing yards Louisville had against Notre Dame last year? Wasn't a lot. They struggled to throw the football on Notre Dame last year. Matter of fact, I think it was like 145 yards. Let me go look up this guy. It was something low, like 150 yards. 140. I was right. 145 yards, and only averaged 6.0 yards per attempt because they did throw 24 passes. So they, completed 70.8% of their throws. Yeah, because they were all dinks and dunks because they couldn't get the ball down the field. 145 yards passing, but you know why they won that game? Because they can run the ball on Notre Dame. They rushed for 185 yards against Notre Dame. And the first series was about finding ways to get the running game going. That's what that whole first series was about. And it had Notre Dame on their heels for a little bit. And so he's been willing to do that when he has the horses. Let's talk specifically about what makes this scheme difficult. And a big one is, Trevor, they do a lot of stuff that makes you chase in the pass game. A lot, post-snap switches, levels. They run a million crossers, and you got to get it wrong once. And we saw that against Georgia Tech. They got it wrong once. Guy missed a tackle. Chris Bell takes it into guy was there, but why did it work, Trevor? Because that stuff gets your guys in space. You may tackle it 4 times for 4-yard gains, but the one time you miss, you turn a guy loose, it's it's gone. And that's something that I want to see more of from them. They hardly run any crossers at Notre Dame in any kind of levels. He does a lot of that stuff. They do a lot of stuff off play action that's really effective at Louisville. A lot of post-snap switch stuff. They do a million different formations. Like, you've got to be prepared for so much formationally. Now, they're going to run a lot of the same concepts out of all those different looks, but they hit different based on how they're lining up. And those are things like they'll run corner routes like 5 different ways based on where the receiver's lined up, whether it's a true post corner because he's more inside, burst corner, whether it's a deep angle corner, which is I think what Ja'Cory Brooks ran early in the game. Mm-hmm. They do so much stuff that makes you chase, but they also run a lot of stuff that makes you turn. And that's what can really get you in trouble as a DB because of the way that they run routes. You've got to be doing a lot of this. DBs want to do this once on a play. That's it. And then they want to run with you. And so like there's a lot that teams that want to be better throwing the football can learn by watching this Louisville pass offense, just schematically. And they put you in serious binds. And he's really good at finding different ways to get his best players in favorable matchups, whether it's tight ends, running backs, receivers, whatever. He's going to find what your weakness is and how he can best exploit it. Sometimes it may be a slot. Sometimes it may be a Z. Sometimes it may be a tight end. And, and he's got guys that can catch the ball at all those positions on this offense.
Yeah. And I think that's what there was a play against Georgia Tech that they ran, and it was their second string tight end that they brought back, and he was lined up at tight end, but he was off the line of scrimmage, and he faked pass pro for maybe 2 seconds. And it was almost like a broken play. Rolls out, quarterback rolls out to the right and finds the tight end late on a drag route. Late drag route. It was almost like a delayed route. Catches it, goes for I literally think it was 2nd and 24. And I think it went for a first down.
Was that the one they called back because of the penalty?
Yeah, that they called it back because of an illegal man downfield.
It was a screen. That's what made it was a screen. It made it 2nd and 24 after the penalty. Mm-hmm. It was no, you're right. It was 2nd and long, and he delayed and they ran a screen, but he went just a little bit too far down past the line and caught it past the line. But if he executes that, the tight end executes it properly, that's a great play call, which makes it even like Trevor, to your point, it like if you watch it, you look like it's just like a check down that they turned loose, right? And that's so like if you guys go watch this play, I think it was their second or third drive, Trevor, to your second drive. But the tight end is playing left. He kind of looks like he blocks, and then he just kind of takes off underneath. And it almost looks like he's like, because a lot of tight ends do that. They'll check pass pro, nobody comes, it's a check release, you just run a crosser. But it was a screen. That's why that guy was downfield. If the tight end, Notre Dame got called for that against A&M because Cooper Flanagan drifted downfield on a tight end screen. It was a tight end screen, and you're just like, of all the weapons you have, your number 2 tight end, who's a talented player, by the way, is the guy you turn to on that play. And it worked. If he executes it properly, it was a great play call. And like they came out and they were running, remember against Notre Dame last year? And again, they had a little extra time to prepare, but they were running like that fake shovel stuff against Notre Dame on the first drive because they're going to do stuff to you on drive 1 that you haven't seen. Be prepared for it. Now, they don't do that for 60 minutes, but early in the game, first couple series, you're going to get at least 2 or 3 things you have not seen on film from them this year. 100%. And that was a great play call, Trevor, by the way. Because again, like you say, when you watch it, it didn't look like he was necessarily part of what they were doing, but that's why they did what they did, is to set that particular play up. And his offense also is designed to spread the ball around.
Yeah. Louisville's offense as a whole does a lot of things to get your eyes going a lot of different directions post snap, which is going to be a little bit different than what Notre Dame has seen so far this year. They've had a lot of trouble with pre-snap motion, and Louisville doesn't do a whole lot of that. The biggest thing
like
that
the basic stuff. It's like just one receiver motion and a back out.
But
you better believe that Jeff Brahms is going to add something to that this week
100%.
Because of how much Notre Dame has struggled with it.
Yep. Well, and what they would do sometimes throughout the game against Georgia Tech is they would motion and change the formation completely. Sometimes that's something that they did a lot pre-snap. So Tyler Shuck would line up in the gun, and they would have, running back beside him and then 2 tight ends out to the left. and they would shift. Tyler Shuck goes under center. One of the tight ends lines up as a fullback, and then they have a tight end over. So definitely interesting to see what they're going to do pre-snap against Notre Dame. And to your point, Jeff Brom is a genius. So there is going to be a little bit of a wrinkle of what they do.
And
Yeah.
I'm so glad to hear you say that, because that's not hyperbole in my opinion. This isn't let's hype up the coach that Notre Dame's going to ready to play. I believe that. I think this guy's like one of the. I've been breaking his film down since he was at Western Kentucky. I mean, like,
Oh yeah.
this dude is wicked smart. Like, if you're someone who likes offensive coaching, and you're someone who likes creative pass concepts and not gimmicky, creative. There's a difference. Gimmicky is like you put your two offensive linemen out in the hashes and you're doing, you know what I mean? Like, no, this is creative, not gimmicky. And there's a big difference, and it's fun to watch, dude.
Oh yeah. I mean, you don't go out and beat the third ranked team in Ohio State by 29 points because you get lucky. Right? Like Jeff Brom is a genius when it comes to, like, for all the people that hear those terms tossed out about like they need to scheme their guys open more, go watch a Jeff Brom football game, man. Like he does that. He knows the different ways to get the ball into his playmakers' hands. There's a reason why Rondell Moore absolutely tore Ohio State's defense to shreds that year. And it wasn't because he was breaking 19 tackles on every single play. It's because he was schemed open. He was put in favorable matchups. That's what Jeff Brom is able to do.
But here's the other thing too, is what did they do to Ohio State that game that had Ohio State a little bit off balance early? Is he went away from what they kind of normally did. Mm-hmm. And how did he do that? They ran the ball. I mean, people forget DJ Knox had 100 yards rushing that game because they were doing things to get them off balance in that game. And to your point, Rondell Moore was making dudes miss 15, 20 yards down the field. But he was also, but here's the thing about some of him making people miss. When he was making people miss, that's part of the game plan. It's get your guy in space against them. This is exactly what we've been talking about with Notre Dame's running backs. Design ways, blocking ways to get them in space, because if they get them in space, you're going to have a hard time bringing them down. And A&M had a hard time doing that. Purdue had a hard time doing that. Every team that they play, I mean, Jeremiah Love, the run he had against Northern Illinois, the problem that people had was like they probably should have carried the ball more in that game, especially with Riley Leonard not being able to run that game because of his shoulder. Yep. And that's the thing is like, yeah, okay, well, yeah, Rondell Moore. But why was Rondell Moore in space so many times getting the football in ways where they weren't on him? They had to try to close on him and tackle. You don't think Ohio State's game plan was like, hey, we may want to not let Rondell Moore go off? It wasn't like they had no clue who that guy was until that, man, we never heard of Rondell Moore. He just kind of – it's not like Timmy Smith in the Super Bowl against the Broncos. You know what I'm saying? Like where like he wasn't even part of their whole team until – Super Bowl was kind of his breakout party. No, everybody in the country knew who Rondell Moore was even before that game. I mean, he had already had – look, he was a freshman on that team. He already had 4 100-yard games before that against Northwestern, Missouri, BC, and Illinois, and he had 8 for 85 against Nebraska. Ohio State knew very well who Rondell Moore was coming into that game. And there was still nothing they could do about it because Jeff Brom coached circles around their defensive staff, and that's always the fear with him. Now, I don't know that he's going to necessarily be able to do that to the degree he did that night against this defensive coaching staff, but he can do enough to beat you because we just saw him do it a year ago. You know what I mean? Yep. And he's got weapons. You look at the Louisville roster just overall, I do think Tyler Shuck is a more talented quarterback than Jack Plummer. Yep. He's a better athlete. I think he's got a better arm, better release, better ball placement when he's healthy. I think their running back room is not as good as last year, but it's still good. I don't think their offensive line is as good as it was last year, especially their tackles. I've actually been kind of disappointed with the play of their line, especially against Georgia Tech. But their skill talent is even better than it was overall last year. Like receiver, tight end. Like they had good receivers last year. Jamari Thrash was a good player, but this receiving core is even better, and they haven't even gotten Colin Lacey back yet. Like, imagine what this offense is going to look like when Colin Lacey comes back healthy. Now, they did lose Jadon Thompson to a season-ending injury. He got hurt against Georgia Tech. But he was their number 3 receiver, not their number 1 or number 2. Like so far, Brooks and Bell have been their top receivers so far. But when you get Colin Lacey back, good Lord.
Yeah.
Like and their running backs this year are kind of like complementary pieces where last year they had like legit, like a legit 1-2 punch last year at running back with Jordan and I'm forgetting the Isaac Guerrero, right? Who both got drafted last year. I don't think they're as good there. I don't think they're as good on the offensive line. So they're having to scheme a little bit more for run game success this year. But they have a more mobile quarterback than they had last year. But Trevor, I don't know if you agree with this, but I just think their overall pass catching skill and pass game skill is just better than it was a year ago, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, it's completely elevated, and I touch on it a little bit in the article that we're putting out tomorrow. But it's what they are now lacking in the run game that they are missing from the 2023 season. They're making up for in their pass catchers because they are like that part of the offense has now been elevated. Ja'Cory Brooks is a freak athlete. Like one thing that I don't think it's talked about enough is his ability to make people miss in space as a 6'3", 195-pound wide receiver. Like he's not just a big-bodied guy that they throw fades up to. He is a really good athlete. Same thing when they get Colin Lacey back. Is he for sure out on Saturday? Is he questionable?
They are Brom said so when he originally got hurt, the time frame, the beginning of the 6 to 8 weeks was this week. Was the beginning of when the window for his return would be. Brom said yesterday that they're going to try to get him going and it'll be a game time decision. If he's healthy enough to play, he's going to play.
Sure.
And but you also have to be like, okay, if he's not, do you really want to? I mean, you're in a good enough position to where you can still go win a football game with what you have.
Sure.
But they're going to try to ramp him up. Part of me, you prepare like he's going to play. Like if I'm Notre Dame, you prepare because if you have a game plan to shut him down, also, then you can handle whoever else is going to replace him.
Yeah,
but I would prepare like he's going to play. Is what I would do if I was Notre Dame. But yeah, he's questionable for the week so far as of right now.
Okay. But yeah, man, I mean, the running back room, it's very much a stable right now. And I don't mean like it, I think they mentioned it in the Georgia Tech game that they will just feed the hot hand. They don't have a guy that's like, hey, this is our guy, and then we'll bring this guy in on a down and distance. I think they played 4 different running backs by the time there's 13 minutes left in the second quarter. So they do have like their first 2 guys they're not crazy athletes. I do know they have a true freshman. His name is escaping me right now.
Yes,
but
you're talking about Isaac Brown or Kewan Brown. I think Isaac Brown, the kid from Florida, number 25.
Yeah.
He's
that kid
electric.
is fast. He is shifty, man. So he is kind of their change of pace back to bring it in. But the first 2 guys they have on the depth chart, one of them transferred in. Not crazy athletes, but still effective. And Jeff Brom will want to establish the run game, especially after what Notre Dame did against Miami of Ohio. So.
Yeah, and it's also interesting too because like Don Chaney's listed as a starter, but he actually has fewer carries. He's actually 4th on the team in carries. So Kewan Brown has their most carries. He's got 19, and then Maurice Turner, who's only played 2 games, and Isaac Brown, who's the kid you were talking about, have 16 carries. Now Maurice Turner did not play against Georgia Tech. And then you have, like I said, Kewan Brown has 19 carries. He's their extra leader in carries, but he's only had 9. Like here's to back. This is why I was going to go at this point is they have 5 guys on the roster, 5 running backs with at least 13 carries so far this season. And if you look at it, the most that Isaac Brown had was 8. The most that Duke Watson has had is 6. The most that Kewan Brown has had is 9. The most that Maurice Turner had was 12 against Jacksonville State. And then the most that Don Chaney had was 10 against Georgia Tech. So of all those running backs, only 2 of them in a game have gone over 10 yards or 10 carries in a game or gotten 10 carries in a game because they spread it. Like you said, they're going to spread it around. And if somebody's hot, then they're going to do that. Now against Notre Dame, I would expect him to do some things with the 2 faster backs to try to create big play opportunities. Because I think he knows in this game you're going to have to create some big plays. We saw it last year. He took that first drive right up down the field, and then after that, it was like, if you can't get a big play, you're not scoring on Notre Dame. And the next 2 touchdown drives when the game was in doubt, both were fueled by big plays
Mhm.
in the run game. And so he knows he's going to have to create some. So you're going to see something with a back on a screen, a back on an angle route, a back on a wheel, something with trying to get the tight ends loose, some kind of throwback, they're going to do something to try to generate big plays. And I think the running backs and the tight ends are the position where, if I'm looking at this team and knowing Jeff Brom like I do, those are the two positions that I would be most concerned about trying to catch you with something in this game. And again, what else does that do? That gets those guys in matchups against your most inexperienced part of your football team, which is your linebackers. And that's the thing, is Jeff Brom is not only going to say, hey, here's what we do. He's going to look for your weak spot and look to exploit it in a lot of different ways. And as Northern Illinois proved, if you can do things to get the Notre Dame linebackers thinking and guessing, you can create potential missed opportunities or mistakes by them. And I think that's what we're going to see. He's probably one of the best in the business, in my opinion, about finding ways to hurt you in the areas where you're least effective. And he can find your soft spot and say, okay, that's how I'm going to make you pay for that. So, yeah, somebody said we got a crush on Jeff Brom. I'm like, football-wise, yeah, I do. I mean, I've never hidden that fact, ever. You know what I mean? So I will own that. I will absolutely own that. But it also, if you are able to shut this offense down, it speaks volumes about how good you are on defense. Last year, I think they were a little bit easier to shut down just because I thought their quarterback was limited. And although they had good receivers, they weren't scary receivers. Jamari Thrashke hits a big play, but they were about scheme last year, Trevor. Like, that's how I felt about Louisville last year. They were just good because they were coached well. This year, I think they have a chance to be good because they're coached well, and they're a lot more athletic, in my opinion. And that's what makes them dangerous. This year's version of this football team would have been a much more difficult matchup than for Florida State last year than what they faced in the ACC title game. It was all about,
100%.
man, that's a great job by Brom. I said this a lot. You give him the weapons that this team that he's playing has, and it's a different conversation. And still won 10 games last season. So, heck of a football coach. We'll dive more into the specific matchups here like in tomorrow's show and then Thursday, but we're going to get into defense next. Let's do us a favor, folks, before we do slide over the defense. Do me a favor, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, give us a 5-star, right? 5-star review if you on your favorite platform, podcast platform. And of course, make sure you sign up for the message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com.